yourself, Andrew, maybe on the equipment, if you don't mind being the guinea pig.
I make a pretty good guinea pig.
Yeah, right. So Andrew had, what is it, emphysema, right? So it's a little bit, or you're recovering emphysema. How would we explain it?
There was a time when I was diagnosed with something called that.
I like that, right? It is a symptom. A symptom of shortness of breath, right? And this is, you know, maybe a few other symptoms there. And so whether we have anxiety, asthma, for those that don't know, I was asthmatic most of my life. Until 40 years old, and then I kind of hacked it and realized, oh, I did not have, I was breathing up here and more heavy breathing, over breathing. It's like when you have asthma, you feel like you have a shortage of air and you think you need more air, and that's the opposite. You need less air, more CO2 in the system. So I went back to school and got a master's in the applied breathing sciences and came to understand the breath. It is really deep. It's not deep as a pun, but deep as in it's, you know, the science, it's both, it's a behavior as well as part of our autonomic nervous system, and like other behaviors, it can go out of whack if you don't do it, if you're not mindful of how to bring about a more of a peak performance or real functional breathing habit around. And so that's what I retrained. And it was actually not even in the degree. They didn't even look at it through the lens that I look at it now. And they looked at it more as, oh, let's help people with anxiety. We can look at the breath. We can look at it through capnometry biofeedback, one's respiration, one's heart rate, one's CO2 levels. We can look at the chemistry of the breath and figure out, oh, maybe there's some traumas that happened to you early in life that you know, kind of override your breathing habit and, you know, made it less functional. And by traumas, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be something that was, you know, a shock to the system. It could also be just a lot of pollens in the air. You know, if you move to an area where you're not ready for all these pollens, you're already an overbreather, and you all of a sudden take in all these allergens, cause you to be stuffy through the night. Next thing you know, you're a mouth breather and your chemistry starts going awry. So these are things so that was the lens through which the master's like, oh, let's help people see why they had traumas and how to tweak it. And my lens is, no, let's go to peak performance. Let's just start building respiratory fitness, and we will undo some of the other stuff out there. We will make you more resilient to undo anxiety, undo asthma, undo emphysema, depression, all these other things. Because once we start getting our physiology healthy, our chemistry, internal chemistry right, a lot of other things come back, right? Especially since getting it right involves exercise. And that is a game changer for all things health. If you're not an exerciser, you tend to dwindle this way. If you're an exerciser, you know, and if you're mindful, you know how to exercise well, you can really live a lot longer and have a longer health span. And I do teach people to breathe less. When we breathe less, we actually have less toxins coming in our system. We actually hold more CO2 in our system. Often people, because I was a corporate wellness director, and there's a lot of people that, oh, I forgot to breathe. It's one of those myths. I, through my presentation, shatter some of the myths of breathing, and you're hitting on one of them, is that some people think they forget to breathe. Well, that's more that their nervous system kind of knows they don't need to be breathing a whole lot. If you're sitting around doing nothing, you're meditating, when we really get deep into meditation, that breath becomes quiescent. It's like not there until we look at it, and then it goes, oh, you know, and it starts picking up. But often when we get into that 0 point, that deep spot, there is no, and it's like, well, am I forgetting to breathe? No, there's not a need to breathe. So if we're doing quiet reading, if we're sitting on the couch, we're not doing a whole lot, our autonomic nervous system is settled, we're not watching some movie that's got us like freaked out, you know, ready for fight or flight, then that's a good sign that we're not breathing a whole lot, because we don't need much. We don't have to offset the lactic acid that builds up in our muscles or get ready for running. You know, in many cases, people have a stressed system, a hypervigilant state that makes them ready for fight or flight. And this is a stress response that is up here, way above the baseline of where it should be. So they are naturally over breathing and that is shifting the chemistry in their body. So when I say shifting the chemistry, I'm talking about shifting the pH of the waters in the body. So this is a big one. I know it gets a little bit technical, but breathing is directly correlated to the pH in the cerebrospinal fluid, the blood plasma, the interstitial fluids. So it has a big response, and pH is really important. It's to stay in a very narrow band of close to 7.4. If it gets out of whack, we start to develop a lot of symptoms. And so we have buffer systems, you know, they're called bicarbonate buffer systems that help us keep that pH in balance. Thank you, Michael. And these buffer systems keep it close to that 7.4, but if we're over breathing a lot, and I say, where do we over breathe? If we're mouth breathing a lot, then we're over breathing, we're giving off a lot of CO2, and that is causing our pH to go up in an area called hypocapnia, and it's called respiratory alkalosis. It's no bueno. It's a condition, a medical condition, you know, they want to call it, there where we have overbreathed and it's like hyperventilation and it starts throwing off our chemistry in the body. And eventually it develops into symptoms of asthma, you know, it can affect our consciousness in the sense that we can, you know, it takes off the frontal lobes of the brain, so it can make us more emotionally unstable. It can turn in blood clotting. We're not vasoconstriction, so if we are over breathing, it actually constricts the blood vessels, so it can cause migraines, headaches, high blood pressure, these sorts of things, cold hands and feet, right? If we have constricted blood vessels, we're not getting good blood flow to the hands and feet. It's called Raynaud's symptoms, Raynaud's disease. You know, they made it a disease. It's really just because of overbreathing. So there are like 100 different conditions that are affected, either exacerbated or caused by overbreathing. So it's a big deal that no doctors really, they teach a little bit in medical school in the first year, but because there's no prescription for it, they quickly move through it, right? You're not going to give someone a CO2 pill or help someone develop respiratory fitness. And unfortunately, coaches, yoga instructors, you know, they get, oh, let's work with the breath, but they really have no formal training on the breath. And so Wim Hof, he knows what I know, but he still hasn't espoused less breathing rather than more breathing, because he gets a bit bigger hit from people out of being sympathetic. Let me hyperventilate a little bit, then maybe go in cold water, although he doesn't really put those two together. But the hyperventilation does bring up our sympathetic nervous system, sometimes makes people feel good in the short term. Okay, I'm empowered, but it's not a good strategy long term, because it is a cortisol, it is a stress on the system, it is throwing off our pH balance. It just has a long-term deleterious effect. And so the real trick here is less breathing. And so that's building.
That's good news.
That's good news.
For me.
Yeah, that's good news for you, right? That your system knows not to breathe that much, you know? And so, oh, I need to be mindful of my breathing at all times. No, not necessarily. We may need to be mindful of our breathing as we learn a new breathing habit, which is learn to breathe less. And that doesn't mean like, oh, let me be mindful all the time of breathing less. It means being mindful of breathing with your mouth closed. And that means even when you're sprinting up a hill. It means even, I was going to say swimming, but that's a little tough. It can be done. But even when you're working out, you know, even when you're really pushing it, oh no, it's not time to mouth. The mouth is for eating, the nose is for breathing. And there's a lot of reasons of which I just explained a few. So we're going to take a look now at what's going on with our friend Andrew. And so this is not putting oxygen in your system. This is just going to read your CO2 levels. And you're just going to look this way, breathe normal. Oh, good, Michael, you put the PCO2.
I don't know if the batteries are charged or not on the black box. I don't know how to tell.
Let's see, they're in there. They should be good. Let's find out. Did you put? Yep, you got this on. Good. Let's see. Make sure. Yep. You got it.
I know, I suspect, Mark, that
I would just look this way, Andrew. We'll get back to that. I just want you to kind of breathe normal. No meditation here. You can think any thoughts you want. You're not trying to do any special breathing. You're just kind of listening to the questions, not changing anything. Because we just want to get a baseline of what you've got. And then we'll shift some things around if we need to. Okay, Lily.
Our pattern of breathing in sleep. It's like an unconscious pattern, so we might not even know, we might breathe with our mouth open.
Yes. Oh, that's a great point.
And it's snoring and
So Lily is talking about, hey, when we sleep, what's going on, right? We don't have as much control of our breathing pattern, and so it's really important to build a very functional, highly functional breathing habit during the day so that naturally it automatically is doing well. If not, I will suggest what has happened to my father. So I have all sorts of breathing issues that are in my family, and I'll use this question as a way to pivot there, because not only was I asthmatic and over breathing, mouth breathing, and had poor chemistry, and it was constricting the bronchial chambers, because what happens with an asthmatic when you overbreathe, it actually constricts the airways. Under breathing, the trick was ending up, which is counterintuitive, I had to breathe less. I had to go into a real gentle state of meditation in order for those airways to open back up, and voila, I was able to breathe, unless I was in the room with a cat that I was allergic to. You have to get rid of what you're, pollen or whatever it is that's causing that. But exercise, and do anyone have exercise-induced asthma? Yeah.
I wish somebody who did start running marathons. That probably wouldn't be so good then.
Well, it can be if you learn how to build respiratory fitness, but often, like I was doing triathlons and saw a lot of people mouth breathing, and I had, even when I had figured out my gut health issues, because that's the first thing. I help a lot of asthmatics, and I recommend people, if you have friends that are asthmatic, send them my way. I can get that quelled if they're open to listening and changing habits. You have to fix the gut too, because asthma is an inflammatory response. Some people, they get metabolic dysfunction. Other people, it's things like asthma. So you have to fix leaky gut and get a healthy diet. That fixed a lot of things for me, but not all. And so when I still had exercise-induced asthma, not until I went and got the master's degree, oh, okay, I need to, more nose breathing and build respiratory fitness, and that kept the bronchial chambers opened up. And so to alleviate asthma, building this respiratory fitness helps. And so your question about sleep, again, I want to come back to Lily's question about sleep, because what happened with my father is he was a marathon runner, and yet he had a heart attack right around my age, and we were like, what's up, Dad? How did that happen? You're this bulletproof guy who runs marathons. He's like, well, probably too many jelly donuts. And maybe that was partly true, but when I finally put him on the, this is 10 years later, on the capnometry equipment, it was like, oh, I get it. All this exercise, he was a mouth breather for when he exercised and when he didn't exercise, so his chemistry was off. And so it was causing high blood pressure, it was causing a lot of vasoconstriction, it was causing eventually atrial fib, and eventually at night sleep apnea, and then it was causing a heart that was like, screw it, I'm out of here, heart attack, right? That's the path for a lot of guys. Women, not as much, women maybe other things, but it is when the alarms go off, the ambulance at 4 in the morning, it's often heart attack stuff, that the heart is going, no mas, I'm done. And it starts with a poor breathing habit and poor eating habit. And so that's where the shift needs to occur for longevity. So we're looking at Andrew, and thank you for being here. So what we're seeing, and Andrew was a big wave surfer, was a surfer for all his life, right? And so we learned, today, surfers, especially if you're in the big waves, huge Santa Cruz, good sized waves, and other places, Costa Rica, it's like you need to have respiratory fitness. If you're getting pounded out at Mavericks or other places, you need to be able to hold that breath a ways, right? And so, but something happened, you were mentioning COVID back, or more a flu that happened better part of 15 years ago, how long ago?
New Year's Eve of 1999 to 2000.
24 years ago, oh wow. That so something happened that then you notice that, oh, your breathing
My
never
respiratory, I lost my
respiratory.
capacity.
Yeah. So it was an instant. So while I don't have an idea there, what we're looking at here, and when we're talking, so we're looking at your. Can you guys see this over here? Okay. So what we're looking at are CO2 levels, and you can even look at this, Andrew. You can take a look here. And CO2, so this is what we're reading here, our CO2 levels, and this is really what's important because 35 millimeters in the medical books of partial pressure of CO2 is what is necessary to keep our pH in balance. And so this line here, these are the units over here from 0, 35 is at that, and then it's 40. And so having CO2 between 35 and 40 is ideal. And we see Andrew's down here at about 20, kind of closer to where my father was, and close in age too, for that matter. And for every 1 millimeter below 35, it's actually 2% less blood flow to the brain. So we're not actually getting the blood flow we need up here, you know, for especially cleaning out the system at night. And this is just a snapshot in time, by the way, Andrew. So this doesn't mean that all the time you're here, but it's a window into the here and now. And so it's like, oh, this is like, there's something to address here, right? That this is considerably low, and maybe go figure, okay, this emphysema is keeping you from building respiratory fitness, but it is something that we would want to address because we want to give you a good 50 additional years to your health span here, or more, right? And I would argue that this is a big play on what could take you down if not addressed, not to scare anyone, but hey, this is something, because it can constrict the blood vessels and cause it certainly can constrict the bronchial chambers, and so we want to get these bronchial chambers open back up. And so how would we, so then the question becomes, okay, how do we build respiratory fitness and bring these CO2 levels back up? We're going to go now and look at your meditation habit and say, okay, because some people have a Wim Hof breathing habit as their meditation, and I'm not going to ask Andrew to do that because I don't think that's part of your habit, doing
I
Wim
don't
Hof.
even know what it is.
Okay, good. We won't train you in that direction because I do have people that say, oh, they do Wim Hof breathing every morning. I'm like, well, let's go for it and see what it does to your chemistry. And invariably they do their breath of fire, and invariably they bring their CO2 levels down 5, 10 millimeters of hydrate. And I'm like, okay, is this helping you? And well, maybe it makes me feel good for the moment. I'm like, okay. As far as a practice goes and helping your breathing chemistry, it is not that great a practice. And then when we look at the other presenting symptoms that a person has that is doing Wim Hof breathing, like passing out, like having migraines, like having cold hands and feet, I'm like, well, maybe choice is yours, right? But consider a shift and let's see what happens in a few weeks or a month and see if you're starting to feel better. So in this case, Andrew, let's just move into a meditation with a little less breathing. I mean, because that typically happens. Let's just see what happens if you're just kind of breathing normal, but maybe, let's see what happens as normal with your meditation, and we'll see how this shifts. And of course, you won't be watching it, we'll be watching it. So take a few, and I realize it doesn't mean you can get into a 0 point that quickly, but maybe we'll look at tweaking the meditation habit, because I know you have one, to help build our respiratory fitness. And so we'll go with that, and you can try just, pausing the breath. What I recommend to people is not pausing the breath at the top, but pausing the breath on the out breath. And let's just see what happens with your chemistry. Beautiful. This is a wonderful meditation for you. And while it might be a little bit stressful, because those are nice long pauses, this is bringing your CO2 levels up from 20 to 25 millimeters, which is a nice jump. It's not yet at 35, but over time, this is one way to help build not just a mindfulness practice, because with every breath, you have to be mindful of holding a little longer than is comfortable. So this is one of the ways I might suggest to a person to help not just their meditation, but also build better physiology. Because at the end of the breath, we're going to pause a little bit longer than is comfortable and just hold more CO2 in our system. We're essentially desensitizing our pons and the medulla and the brainstem in these centers that are in our aortic arch to having more CO2. So that instead of breathe, 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 we more naturally are breathe. Breath. Now this is not only changing our CO2 levels and the chemistry and the pH, in the body, it's also changing our brainwaves. So it's bringing us from a more high beta brainwave pattern. If we're in a high respiration state, we typically are also in a higher beta state, right? Which is a more sympathetic, higher cortisol state, more vigilant state, which can be necessary from time to time, but we don't want it at our baseline state. And so we want to be bringing those beta brainwaves also down to alpha. And in the case of a deep meditation like Andrew has and many of us have, we're bringing it down into theta, which is that world of where the drop-ins, the downloads, the good stuff happens, right? So, but on our way to theta is often alpha, and alpha is where we want our baseline when we're hiking, when we're doing things outside. We're more in this state of alpha, where we're not stressed out. I mean, many can still be stressed out. The trust frequency is an alpha state, I would argue. It is allowing, right? It is a connection state. It is an allowing state. It is a state where there is more, less of a nervous system drive to let's go get it. It's allowing things to happen in more of a flow state. And so that's where we want to go. That's what I train people. Hey, let's move into the flow state. It's a lot better on your system. This whole idea of controlling destiny, not so good. Let the man, let the universe, the loving universe control destiny. You'll be much better off. I'm going to move this screen to HRV, and let's see whether oh good, it is working well. So just stay still like you are, perfect. We are looking now at Andrew's heart rate variability, which is not so bad for 81-year-old. Oh, he's 31, excuse me. There is no age with this gentleman. And so we're looking biological age here, right? So we're looking, heart rate variability is one of those biomarkers of our heart health, of our health in general. And so having high heart rate variability is healthy. Not necessarily a high heart rate, but variation in our heart rate. So when a doctor takes a pulse and says, oh, you've got 65, and that's good enough, but really it's not really a great measure. Really, we should be looking at one's variation in heart rate, which may range anywhere from 60 to 70. As we breathe in, it goes up, the heart rate variation goes up. As we breathe out, it goes down. And so this variation is essentially equates to our ability to get up and go, our autonomic nervous system's ability to get up, fight or flee, or to rest and digest. And a vagal tone, it's called, that is capable of moving into get up and go or rest and digest is very healthy. So it points to a healthy heart. It doesn't guarantee a healthy heart. There's other things that can go wrong with the heart, but having good heart rate variability is really important. And so as we age, our heart rate variability tends to go down. When I measured Ben's or my son Luke's, Michael's at age 20, if you're athletic, you're getting it on and you're a nose breather, you have really good, you have a heart rate variability of 20, 30, meaning that it can go anywhere from, if you're athletic and fit, might be baseline of 40 or 50 with a 20 spread, upwards and downwards. So that's healthy. As we age, that spread gets narrower and narrower, and we're lucky if it's from 70 to 75, right? So it is something that as we build respiratory fitness, we're also building heart rate, our heart rate's ability to vary, and heart rate variability. So this is another thing that comes along with building respiratory fitness, not just cardio fitness. And so I want to address the difference that when we're hitting the gym, running on the treadmill, thinking we're doing cardio fitness, well and good, we're getting good blood flow, and that's all healthy and all, but we're not really, if we really are having to run for some reason, sprint, what gets in the way the most? Is it our muscles or is it our breathing that would make it drain us? And usually it's a person's breathing that they're not able. So we want to train that weak link in the chain, and that's our breathing, and build this respiratory fitness for the whole list of reasons I just mentioned. So we can see, as Andrew, this is the beauty of meditation too, and one of the good from a physiology standpoint of meditation is that when you breathe, go ahead and move back into meditation, Andrew, if you would, because we'll be showing how the heart rate loves a 10-second breath, or roughly a 10-second breath, because then the heart rate goes up and down with the breathing. And this is called a meditator's breath, right? And it doesn't have to be 10 seconds, it could be a 15-second breath, it could be a 30-second breath, but essentially the heart rate starts going up and down with the breathing, and it just loves this. This is the heart's, like, what I call heart, breath, and brain coherence. So we're bringing ourselves into a more coherent state, one that is more easier to align with the universe, right, and the collective. And likely, although not proven, one that can probably bring about this change that we want to have happen a little more, because we're not in this fight or flight. So this is beautiful. We're seeing a heart rate variability here of between 56 and 74. That's really the best I've seen in someone that's, got a little, one of our, we'll just call them wisdom keepers, someone that's a little older. So it's a testament, Andrew, to A, your meditation habit, but B, this variation in heart rate looks really nice. And so it's really the respiratory fitness of getting the CO2 levels up that would be what where I coach people and look at, well, what does your day look like? How can we build in a jam that doesn't get in the way of your everyday doing and helps move you into a space where you're building respiratory fitness so that it's easy. We don't want to make a shift in habits too arduous, or people will say, nah, forget about it. No, we want them to move in a way that's a little more graceful, like, oh, I can do that. Oh yeah, I can fit that in here, or that's part of my day already. Let me just tweak it a little bit. Meditation is part of many people's here's habits, so let's just tweak it a little bit, so that we're doing it right, so to speak. So,
what about pranayama?
Yeah, so you're asking, Joanna, about pranayama, and pranayama is healthy, especially if it's the right kind of pranayama, right? So a breathing habit that is not breath of fire.
Well, that's Kapalapati, where, you're bringing up your
Kundalini.
Uliya Bandha, your lock, and then you're breathing in and out. But then you should, like, Anulama Lama, balancing the right and the left hemispheres, and it would be going up and then holding it, and then holding it for up to 16 seconds, or maybe just
Or a minute.
and then letting it out the other side.
Yeah, so you can do these. I don't want to say that, oh, these are unhealthy. I mean, these are things that, the Eastern Indians have come up with as, ways to, and they balance things. From a physiology standpoint, from a pH standpoint, if it's, if it is a little breath of fire, or fire breathing, you're blowing off a lot of CO2, but then if you hold it and then there's a purpose, you're holding in CO2. So it could balance out okay from a physiology standpoint. I would, suggest, like I'll do, I might even suggest for Andrew as a coaching mechanism, okay, let's hold that breath. If we're going to do a pranayama, especially before meditation, because it's one of those 8 limbs of yoga that is healthy to do prior to meditation, just like, yoga, the typical asanas. And I would suggest holding the breath on the out breath a lot longer than is comfortable, and that is going to help you build respiratory fitness, because you're going to have big breaths, like you see where my ohms are. I can do minute and 15 breaths for 5 to 10 minutes, where I have one breath every 15 minutes, and it's building lung capacity, where maybe it's initially a 15-second in breath, 35, 40-second out breath, and a pause at the end for another 10 seconds. And so over time, so this is where now as a beginner, you might just be, 3-4 seconds in breath, no pause at the top or very little, a 15-second out breath, and then a pause at the bottom. And you might be gassed at the end of that out breath. Feel the pain. This is a great meditation of just feeling that pain. Make it a near-death experience. These are good for us, right? Hormetic stress, and then do it again. That's a mindful breathing habit, right? Of desensitizing these sensors to having less air. Again, it's like spanking the kid. No, that's not a right
It was
analogy.
kind of bizarre because I felt like, now you're going to die, and I'm like, I want to die, but maybe that was just a metaphor.
It's a metaphor, and it is.
My soul, like, or my.
It is for some it can be traumatic. Even having a pause at the end of the breath is like, whoa, wait a second. For some people, that is scary. I see people that don't, on their breath, come down all the way. They're taking the next breath before they even really release all of their breath. That's a trauma that's happened, that we help people through and get out of. Like, okay, let's desensitize. Let's get used to having more CO2 in our system. That can set off panic in itself. So there's work to be done. The CO2 level is not comfortable, for a lot of people until you're like, oh, okay. So it can be a slow go unless you have a lot of grit. And then it's like, and that's why I put people on hill sprints, because you're running up, you're walking up, even walking up a hill, jogging, sprinting, whatever it is, you're gassing it, just nose breathing. And then the pain comes at the end. You actually, when you're doing it, it's not so bad, right? It's not so bad. And then at the end, it's like, and especially if you're forced to nose breathe and not mouth breathe at the end, it's like, you wanting to get that air in and that CO2 out. And that's when the training occurs. You're punching your system saying, no. And that's where you're building the capacity. So that's my biggest hack, when people are ready for it. Or if you got a lot of grit. So, and so just for those that, might have, asthma, emphysema, these things, it's still where it's tough to breathe when you, or exercise-induced issues there with the breathing, we'll just call it windedness. It's stick with it. Just build that capacity to have more lung capacity, and over time, this windedness will go away, or will, I should say, will get better. It may not go. It's all a function of, if you're on, Mount Whitney at 14,000 feet, you may get a little winded up there. You just don't have as much oxygen. Yeah, and so there's another, I'll mention it. I know we're kind of out of time, but when we have more CO2 in our system, oxygen is actually delivered more easily to the blood, tissues, muscles that need it. So it's called Bohr's law, and so oxygen won't be released from the hemoglobin if you don't have enough CO2 on the red blood cell. So it keeps it, like CO2 is the gatekeeper. Like, oh, no, I'm not gonna let oxygen go. And it's actually a function of the pH, so it's not as much a function of the CO2, but it's a function of the pH on the red blood cell, that it won't get released. So, if you want to be an efficient Ironman contender, or even like MMA, it's like you want to be efficient with this blood flow. It's true for everyone, not just in sports, but it really helps in sports too, to have more efficiency. You know, when you're going up a big hill or something, you're getting the oxygen to the places that need it, and you're not oxidizing as much. So you're not taking a lot of extra oxygen. It's really just oxidizing your system. So these are longevity hacks that I've come upon and tested, and kind of proven out with some people. So it's proven out in the research. It's just not that well known because there's some big personalities out there suggesting something otherwise. So, all right,
Could
Andrew,
asthma
this
come from fungus and black mold too?
what's that?
Couldn't asthma come from
Oh, sure.
exposure to black mold and
Asthma
fungus?
can come from black mold, pollens, dander, any number of dust mites, right? Asthma, leaky gut. So it's a melting pot of things that might create that inflammation, and so by the time it happens, you might have to look at, well, what else? Certainly mold will be one of those, can be one of those things that sends us over the edge and sends our inflammatory response. And then some people may have asthma, others may have other conditions that come, rashes that come about. All these are inflammatory responses, and that's a kind of another topic that we can address another time.
I was just thinking because of all the flooding, and then
Yeah.
after the flooding, I stayed in a place like that, down in Florida once by Disney World, and I was in the room for a very short time, and I had to go back up in the front and say, I cannot stay in this room, and they're like, why? And I'm like, there's mold, I can't stand it, and they're like, we thought we'd clean that out, or we'll get you in a new one, but
Yeah.
they, from the hurricanes. and
Sure, yeah, you've got to be
It gets in the walls.
vigilant around, humid place. A lot of people move to Arizona for the purpose of less mold. Well, there's still mold here, but it's a little drier, so less likely.
Only unless it gets in the wall.
Right, unless it gets in, So, okay, Andrew, we've got work to do. We'll talk over the next day or two about some things that we can put in place, but you've got a great meditation habit that definitely supports your building respiratory fitness, and now holding it a little bit longer at the end of the cycle really will help desensitize and bring it brought your CO2 levels up considerably. So
that's new to me.
yeah.
Because I was always really balanced.
Yeah, so we're tweaking it to help this, and so it'll be interesting to see how over time your windedness or lack of your fitness, respiratory fitness is. Whether we tweak the meditation habit a little bit to build better lung capacity, or even the walking habit, exercise habit, so that we're never breathing out through the mouth or in through the mouth, always through the nose.
Pulmonologist told me that I had lost 65% of my lung capacity. It's kind of a scary thing to do.
Yeah.
Happy to be building it again.
Yeah, so this will build it. I swear, it's might take a little bit of time, but you got plenty of years left. So this is on we go.
All right.
Okay, I'm gonna hit the end button here, and we'll get back to a little biocharging.
I actually traveled with one of these.
Yeah.
Right at your place right now.
Okay.